Sean Dustin spent time in federal and state prison for drug trafficking and fraud. Upon release in 2006, he had nothing but the clothes on his back, a bag of mail, and legal paperwork. In 2010, he kicked a long-time methamphetamine habit and started the long climb back up the ladder of life. This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast. If you want transparency and authenticity, you're in the right place. This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast, and this is Sean Dustin.
What's up? This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast, and I'm your host, Sean Dustin. If this is your first time listening, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. It's good to have you with us this evening. A couple of announcements I have. If you're getting any kind of value out of what I'm doing, do me a favor and subscribe, rate, or review. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thumbs the video up, please. Podcast platforms, same thing, all of them. Just subscribe. It'll help my listenership and it'll help me grow and be more visible on the podcast platforms. If you're on Facebook, do me a favor, like it and share. All of the links to this show and relevant links to my guest will be available in the description. You can catch my link tree and everything else where I'm at and how to support the show, how to connect to the show, all the social media, everything that has to do with this show is available in the link tree. Yesterday actually was episode 100. So that was pretty cool. That was a major milestone for me. Never thought I would get to episode 100. Actually, never thought I'd get to episode 10 either. But it was definitely a great show. It was a little bit longer than I like. I usually like to go about an hour. But we went 2 hours, 11 minutes yesterday. And there was a lot of good stuff in there. So I want to introduce my guest this evening. Her name is Monica Perez, which is the co-host of the Propaganda Report podcast. Monica hosted her own show called the Monica Perez Show for 8.5 years on WSB in Atlanta. She is also a Chartered Financial Analyst and a member of the Bar of New York State. How I came across Monica and her investigative journalism and all the information that she puts out in her content was through the Union of the Unwanted. And that's one of my favorite shows. And the host of that show is Ricky Verandis, he hosts another podcast called The Ripple Effect. And his show is doing absolutely that. It's amazing. You should check it out. And we'll talk about that as well. So I'm going to bring Monica in here. Hi, Monica.
Hey, Sean. Hi.
How are you?
Great, thanks. I'm very happy to be here. I love the concept of your show. It's so positive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, my life wasn't very positive for a lot of years, and somehow I just sort of made my way around and got through it. And here I am trying to help other people get through it and talk about other things that I like too.
I have 8 brothers and sisters, and I lost 2 of them to drug abuse. So I know how it seems from the outside to be impossible to get over a crutch without your crutch. It's almost like impossible because it is how you dealt with everything. And so I'm absolutely certain that your story comes with a whole lot of character building and strength and really unique. However, I think that anyone can do it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think that your concept is so great, because what I'd like to know from you is how you did it, because I know lots of people who haven't done it, who don't seem like they're any worse people than anybody else and just cannot do it.
Yeah, a lot of it came down to, it was a lot of trials and failures and trying and failing and trying and failing. And I mean, like I said, it lasted for about 18 years, in 18 different institutions, prisons, jails, rehabs, a lot of broken relationships, a lot of, lost a lot of people in my life as well too. So, and it just, at one point I just got tired of being tired, and the clock was ticking. I was 30, in my early 30s, with nothing to look forward to, nothing to look back on, nothing to no retirement, no anything. Like, what am I going to do? And so reality just kind of set in, and it's like, all right, well, you got to start figuring it out. And in my last, violation, I kind of stopped doing drugs and smoking like a month prior to turning myself into the federal system. And I just okay, well, I don't want to do it anymore after that. So I just continued it and figured out a way to start building my own self-esteem through attaining, having goals, attaining them. And then I just kept leveling up, not picking up. And, eventually I got to where I'm at now.
I have a question for you, and then I won't ask any more questions. I'll let you
then we
ask
can talk about you. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. But I want to know if it is true that if you can pull yourself up, now I forget what I was going to ask, that if you don't, this is what I was going to ask, if you don't like something about yourself, do you need a psychiatrist, or do you need to change that thing? Like, do you need to get okay with it? See, this is what I think is a big turning point when you take control of your life, is that a lot of people say, well, you should, I don't like this about it. It's because you hate yourself and that's why you act like that. And I actually think sometimes what you don't like about yourself is something that you should change, not accept. And I just wonder if that, when you decided to build self-esteem, was it because you said, I'm okay? Or because you said, well, I think you answered the question, I'm doing stuff.
Yeah, well, it was more along the lines of that I had years of doing things in the wrong direction. And so the things that I would get, build my self-esteem on was false. It was a false sense. It was, in doing criminal activity and doing other things, scoring drugs, selling drugs, strip clubs, attention from toxic females or females that didn't have, very high self-esteem, which I targeted for that very reason. And so all of that stuff, it doesn't make you feel good. And then the drugs just kind of numbed all of that. Oh yeah, I'm kind of a piece of shit, but I'm just going to go ahead and get high so I don't notice it and I don't care. When all that's gone, it really would bother me, so I would have to stay high. But to answer your question, a lot of finding out what I didn't like about myself was through realizing that most of the time when I didn't like something in somebody else, it was really what I didn't like about me. And so that shadow work, that shadow work that we have to do, and when I talk about shadow work, it's almost and I use this analogy because for me, it was the easiest to understand. So there's this guy that's super homophobic and just can't stand gay people, just puts them down. He's got blah, 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 blah. Turn to find out, the reason why you don't like it is because them and you're so hateful towards them is because you're attracted to them, or you're attracted to, a man or that activity, and you don't like that in yourself. So now you try to, hate it out of yourself. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I've actually seen that exact example in action. I'm like, oh, that's an extreme reaction. And then thought, oh, I understand why now. Yeah. So, but it's interesting that you said that you got a false sense of esteem from being great at scoring drugs and stuff. That's an interesting stumbling point because people do feel cool. It's glamorized. We get tons of mixed messages from the media. The government, on the one hand, arrests people for doing drugs, and on the other hand, is the biggest drug dealer in the world. Obviously, it's set up, and it's really meant to be difficult to crawl your way out of. And those are like the hardest things. But I feel like there's a lot inside yourself that you have to access that really isn't going to come from anywhere else. And I did find that out myself when you got me to think about, because you sent me some questions and ways to trigger thinking. So I do have a story for you, even though I am asking you about your story.
No, that's great. I mean, I love the dialogue. I like because I'm a fan. I mean, honestly, I'm a fan of yours and your show, and especially all the stuff that you've been doing with Favorito.
Yeah, Garland.
And I've been following that whole thing, and people. It's really. Somebody said this quote, and it's so true to where we're at. Is the devil's greatest trick was he convinced everybody he didn't exist.
Totally agree.
And that's where we are. We have half the population that follows one thing. We have half the population that is of another mindset. And we have somebody, in the middle that's controlling all of it and making everybody hate each other. Right.
Yeah, I think that was a Kaiser Sose quote.
Yeah, was it? Okay.
I think it's Kaiser Sose. So yeah, Garland is the guy. He's the election integrity activist that I've known for probably 10 years out of Georgia, who is really fighting the good fight. He's almost the last man standing. He's such a good guy. And every week he comes on our show exclusively to tell us about the lawsuits that he continues to fight. I mean, it'd be easy to give up. And neither of us voted for Trump. But we both know that the integrity of the elections is for me, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I don't think that self-limiting government is theoretically possible or possible in reality. However, I also wonder if the whole state of civilization, which I'm not even sure I like civilization anymore. I almost wonder if civilization is the problem. But if we're going to live this way, I really don't want revolution for my kids and like a technological revolution or backwards or forwards, none of that. I want to kick the can. And I think that maybe civilization, our struggle with civilization is just a constant battle to kick that can before totalitarian descends once again. And then we, go into the rubble and try to build up from there. So what Garland and I think we're both on the same page in that. For me, I don't believe in self-limiting government. I don't think it's possible. However, we have a constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, we have laws and rules, and it does keep them in check. Not 100%, maybe not even 50%. But if we can keep fighting that fight on those terms and they still say, yes, there's a constitution, yes, there's a Bill of Rights, they have to answer to it. I think we are approaching a post-constitutional world that it's not true, but I'll go down fighting. And if fighting is just being a ball buster, I mean, I don't know if I can use bad words.
Yeah, you can.
And just say, answer the question. Where are the ballots? Answer the question, because he has affidavits from poll workers in the audit process in Georgia, which is used to suggest people hold it up and say, see, there was an audit. See, there was a recount. See, there's no problem in Georgia. Well, the poll workers at the audit said there were piles of supposedly mailed in ballots that had no crease marks. So they did not arrive in an envelope. They were on the wrong paper stock and they were not. The little circles appeared to be printed with toner. They were perfect circles and there was no impression like a pencil or pen would make. And he has 4 sworn affidavits that there were a lot of these ballots. And it may be included in that some ballots were, many ballots were rescanned, same ballots over and over and over again because they're not marked in any way. So all he's doing is suing to look at the ballots. And the government of Georgia is fighting that. I mean, it makes no sense. Why are you fighting that? It's going to be divisive? No, we'll be uniting because you're pretending they're real, right? Mm-hmm. So if there's nothing to see, then why make us fight this fight? It's like Pizzagate. Why don't they just investigate it? Just investigate it. They wouldn't investigate it. That's not true. That can't be. If any random person called the cops on you and said stuff like they said about that, they were required by law to investigate it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what Garland talks to us about every week, and people are really riveted because it's like the last bastion of truth out there, and it's just simply for the sake of integrity of the system for as long as we can keep it going.
Yeah. I mean, I never in a million years would have thought that we would be where we are right now. And I mean, irregardless of how I feel about it, I look at, the facts of people like smart people like yourself. And like Jason Burmis is another one who, all of his information that he has, he puts it right up on his share screen. So you can go and look at it for yourself. Hey man, don't take my word for it. Go look for yourself. And those are the kind of people that I like to follow that don't really have he's pretty biased. He wasn't a Trump supporter. He wasn't, and I mean, I wasn't either. And
no, I'm not. I've never been a Trump supporter. I'm just a hardcore libertarian. Yeah. But I was on terrestrial radio. I had a radio show, and it was on the conservative channel. It had Rush like I was on Saturdays, but on Friday at that time slot was Rush. So people were getting in the car coming off of Rush and listening to me. I'm a libertarian, and they were listening to Fox News. They were listening to WSB all the time. And I found that in order to set the records, first of all, they always thought I was like a liberal just because I wasn't saying what they were saying. And I'm very much not a liberal. I'm an anarchist, I don't, and not like a communist anarchist, like there's only one law: don't touch me or my stuff. And I can kill you if you try. Like, that's not a liberal. So they couldn't hear that because they were hearing, I just wasn't saying what the other people were saying, but their requirement, I would have to anticipate what the callers were going to say, and I would have to really do my research. Whereas the people who just repeated what Rush said, literally his listeners are called ditto heads. The people who would listen, they wouldn't say, how do you know, Rush? It's just like, well, Rush said, like they were sourcing what they were saying to me by Rush. And I'm like, well, I don't get to just tell you some guy on the radio said. You need me to prove to you that the Iranians are not breaking the nuclear deal, which, I don't care about the Iranians. I'm just saying the stories that you're hearing are lies. And you would have to, I mean, the research I would have to do for a 3-hour show would be like 2 days, because I would anticipate all the calls. And so I just feel like there's such a higher level of integrity in the alternative media now, especially since like Cumulus put out a memo, and I'm sure a million other places did too, saying, or all 6 places, all saying, there's like 6 media companies saying, if you talk about election integrity issues, you are off the air. I mean, how is that a free press? That's the only, there was a Common Core thing where I was looking up what is Common Core a long time ago. And one of the items was, I looked up the Constitution on the Georgia Common Core. And it said, here's an example of a discussion about the Constitution. Is the following bumper sticker protected by the First Amendment? And the bumper sticker was, I love titties. I was like, okay, this is your discussion of the Constitution. Okay. That's your discussion of the First Amendment. How about this? The integrity of the election is the reason we have a First Amendment. So not being able to, I'm not saying that Cumulus is required to, because they're not the government, anybody, they have to follow the rules that the government, because they have licenses. They know where their bread is buttered. And in the 2020 ushered in this era where we basically shut everybody down, and we'll give people a loan who we want surviving. I mean, it's this two-way fascism where the government keeps the companies going. That's kind of traditional fascism. But then there's this inverted fascism where the companies themselves put down this regime of laws that you couldn't actually get passed legislatively, but because they have these oligopolistic industries or monopolistic industries where they kind of control everything, if you want to function economically in your chosen field, you have to obey these rules that look like they're just a private company doing private things. But I'm not buying that anymore. But that's why I think that the independent media, as like marginalized as it is really the only place you can get real information. And that's why we're like had to move on to private servers. I got deplatformed from WordPress. I got fired when I started talking about COVID after 8.5 years on my show. And about Event 201 was the kind of backstory of COVID. I was anticipating what was going to happen, because the thing was just a blueprint. I wasn't like prescient, but it was pretty clear. And whatever, YouTube, everybody kind of just, they marginalize us to the point where we have to move off big tech. And then, it's just expensive and it's hard to spread the word. That's why I love the Union of the Unwanted.
Yeah, that's a great show.
It's so great.
It was, and that was actually one of the first people that I ever had on, Ricky Verandis, that I was like a fan, like fanboy, you know what I mean? And he said yes, and I was like, oh my god, my first, somebody who I actually watched. Someone I actually watch, and there was a whole story behind that, and he was, but yeah, that's a great show. Sam Tripoli, another one, and I originally, so my first, inkling or touch into this kind of world was when I was in prison, federal prison. I was in there with Fritz Springmeier, who wrote The Bloodlines of the Illuminati.
Oh, I think you might have mentioned that. Really blew me away. Wow, yeah, I have that book.
Yeah. And so I used to walk the track with him every night and just listen, maybe not every night, but I mean, quite a bit. Never. And he was just, and I was just this dumb kid that didn't know, I was in my late 20s, 30s, but I mean, I'd been on drugs. And so, I wasn't really.
You can just clip those years right out of the experience.
Exactly. And so I was just hanging on his word and going, oh my God. And then when I got out, I just kind of forgot about it. And then my next thing is probably in 2006 when I had gotten out. I think I'd finally gotten a laptop and YouTube. I found YouTube, and then I found Burmis, and I watched Loose Change, and then that was it.
Oh yeah, that wasn't even good enough for me. I actually got kind of red pilled on the air. I was filling in for a weekday host, which is a lot more listeners and stuff. Hi, Stacy. And so I was like hyper preparing, and it happened to be the day of the Boston Marathon bombing. And I knew I had to go on the air. I knew people would ask me questions, and I needed to know all the answers. And as I dug into that story, I realized that the media was changing the story, not issuing retractions. So Loose Change didn't do it. It was my just trying to piece together the Boston Marathon bombing. And then once I saw that was clearly like the Tsarnaevs were probably in the CIA, or the older brother, not the younger one. He was totally going to be a dentist, but the other guy. And then I realized that 9/11, it was possible what they said about 9/11. And then I started having an open mind about that stuff. And I just obviously never went back, because it's undeniable. Once the scales fall off your eyes, you cannot unsee that stuff. You just can't. And it's laughable. That's why I do my show, because I'm like, just read the newspaper. It is full of lies, like absolute lies. And so bad that I can tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, because they wouldn't be saying this today if they weren't trying to, like, all this stuff about the stock market. Like, I think they're definitely oh, the GameStop thing, and there's all these investors in this Chinese company, whatever. I just feel like they're setting up something where it's this unregulated, like as if it's unregulated at all, but like, it's just, these rogue traders are going to collapse the system. Not zero interest rates forever, not a zero reserve requirement, not $4 trillion deficits, not monetary stimulus up the wazoo. No, none of that is a problem. But it's that Reddit guy. Anyway, so I read those newspapers, and people are like, what do you think? Isn't that crazy? Those guys took over. I'm like, I don't believe anything. So don't ask me. Looks like a setup. It took a couple of years, so maybe that one is authentic, but I can't hardly believe anything anymore.
Yeah, it really is so confusing. I don't even tune into mainstream media anymore. I strictly stick to people that I follow, like yourself and Burmis and Ricky and some other shows. And it is. And even when you do, so the reason why I don't listen to the mainstream, because even when you do, it's a constant reaffirmation of the same thing that they're trying to program you with. Yeah. And it's over and over and over and over. And then when, they get you used to something by saying, oh, a new strain's coming.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Something like that. And you're like, oh, okay, well, there's probably going to be another lockdown here pretty soon because of that. Yeah. So they kind of like get you okay with it. You start hearing about it. All right. So it's not so foreign. And then when it happens, you're already thinking that it was going to happen anyways. So you're just like,
And then but they'll also change it up a little bit. So just as you got used to it, and there was a lot of what I call things a rapist would say, like, if you'll just accept it, it's not so bad. Just let it happen.
Yeah, right.
It's crazy. But as they like give and take away the what like the standards or what the expectations are, like I live in LA now, and they change the numbers, and they say they're going to open the school. My poor son, I have a son with Down syndrome, and they told him he was going to go back to school, which he was really looking forward to. I think they told him like 4 different times, and then they didn't. But it just is regular kind of economic principle is that if you can't plan, you can't really prosper. And I feel like that's part of their kind of plot. Like the Great Reset just screams to me, which is the World Economic Forum's plan, which emerged out of COVID, which they planned Event 201, which anticipated the entire thing a month before it was launched. So obviously, they had this thing teed up. But for me, when you're calling something a reset, what happens when you reset something? You set it to 0. I mean, I just feel like they're just trying to wipe us all out. Of course, not that little tiny little triangle on the top that they live in, but the rest of us. And it's just so ridiculously obvious and sinister now. I don't even feel, I mean, it's almost too crazy that basically the entire world fell into lockstep for stuff that is not legal and not logical. Just crazy. The whole world, and these guys just snap their fingers. And in the Event 201 expose that they put out of themselves in October, they said, if elected officials won't do what we want, we have our rich buddies who are here right now calling them, telling them, and they literally said using soft power to convince them. And they just told us how they were going to do it. It's really mind boggling to me. I really can't, I'm still not used to the idea that how blatant it is. And it's been a year.
Yeah, they did. I mean, the thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me is that, all right, so you can give trillions of dollars to the the banks and to the whatever people that corporations and all of that, but when it comes down to like not starving out your population, and I almost feel like we're in the Roman times and we're all in the center, and here comes the king in his chariot, and they're throwing out bread. You know what I mean? To the peasants. Yeah. I feel like that's what the $600 was, and then they went on the platform of the 2000, at 2000 checks, and that's going to happen if you vote us in. And that happened, and it went to 1,400, and then they wanted to give 1,000, and then and we're still not even knowing. And so So we got 1,800 in 1 year of people being, locked out of their jobs and stuff like that.
Really sick. And they just would not let people make a choice of whether they wanted to risk going to work. I don't know Megan Mullally. What people tell me is Tina Fey. I used to have square glasses, and I looked at people they actually kind of thought I was her sometimes, like in airports and stuff. People would ask me if I was Tina Fey. Well, I should say it happened once when I was sitting in first class. So that that could have been it.
So we got about 15 to 20 more minutes. I got another one scheduled right after this, but how did you get your start? I mean, like what was it for you that like kind of just said, what, that's it, I want to start talking about this and calling it out?
I hope I don't disappoint you. It was not my idea, although it was a natural. So what happened was I have 3 kids. I had 3 babies, and in diapers. They were all in diapers because my oldest has Down syndrome. So he was a real laggard, and I just didn't realize how hard babies were. So I had like a bunch of ones. And I had I was the youngest of 9. My father's a truck driver. He didn't even want me to go into school. I dropped out of high school. I went to community college, and I only went to community college because my mother freaked that I dropped out of high school. Like all her kids were dropouts, but I was like a goody two shoes kind of. So compared to people dying of drug overdoses. So she wanted me to go back. So I went back to community college, and I went to graduate school and I became a banker, and then there was a crash and I lost my job, but it was okay because I was having kids and everything. But I really felt like I had to do something, kind of prepare, maybe make some money when I was freed up, and keep my mind going. So I started studying to be a Chartered Financial Analyst. I figured I'd get back into finance, whatever. And it was so mentally stimulating that it's really funny. It's almost like if you put like fertilizer on the ground, like anything will grow, grass, weeds, whatever. So I just had this, I was like hypercharged mentally. And at the same time that thing was so hard, because it's a 3-year test you have to take, and it's all like math. So statistics, like how hedge funds work and stuff. And it really wasn't what I had done before. I really had. So I just had to study like crazy all the time for no apparent reason, because I wasn't going to be able to get back to work for a long time. And I was reading Hans Hermann Hoppe at the same time, just happened to stumble upon it. And, it is Tina Fey. So I was reading Hans Hermann Hoppe, who's an anarcho-capitalist, and I just had given up on self-limiting government, but it never occurred to me that wasn't the end of the world until I read Hoppe. And he, I guess, cites Rothbard and others who say there's society is self-ordering. And then it was just so obvious that, of course, it's self-ordering. I mean, even our origins were kind of self-ordering. If you look at like the Knights Templar, they were the security for people going on the Crusades, and then they would carry letters of whatever it was, letters of credit, I guess, that referred back to a bank. So you had the banker, the security, the guy at a sword, like these things emerge, especially in capitalist society, because you have surplus, you have trade, you have to secure the trade. There's no reason for a government to do that for you. Like, there is absolutely no theoretical reason. And once you give the government, this outside party, a right to protect you, the only business that guy's in is to make you feel insecure. Fiscally, once you start with socialism, then fiscal insecurity enters the thing. But even originally in a minarchist thing, like a very small government, your physical insecurity is what they trade in. So your government has to be pathocratic. It has to be bad. It has to be contrary to your interests. So my mind was absolutely on fire with this stuff, and I was looking for something to do. I was probably going to go into finance, which would make a lot of money. But, and I went to a wedding of a gal who everybody there spoke Portuguese except for me and this radio producer. So you'll notice that you asked me like one simple question, and I'll probably talk for 10 minutes straight about stuff that does not seem highly relevant. And I was telling her all this Hoppe stuff, and I don't know where this shit came from, but she was just like, that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And she said, and you could just talk to a post. I mean, it doesn't matter if anybody's listening. Am I right? I said, meet my husband. You are right. He just like sits there like, it's like he calls me a fire hose. He's just like, this is a fire hose. So, he loves, he was a big fan of the Monica Perez Show. Anyway, so she brings me to immediately, like drops everything, brings me to her boss, who was the program director at WSB, which was the #1 news talk radio station in the country. And this is basically what happened. And he's like, hi, how are you? And I'm just like, fire hose. And he put me on the air that weekend, that Saturday, and I was on the air every single solitary Saturday, except for I was kicked off for football when football was there, as in my time slot. But I was there the entire time for 8.5 years until the day he retired, and the place got taken over by somebody else. I had just like unrolled all the stuff. It was actually bought by the Epstein guy, the guy who ran Apollo, Leon Black, who stepped down because of Epstein stuff. And we really the first time we were on Sam Tripoli, it was about the Epstein stuff. And then this election stuff was ground zero in Georgia, and we were all over Stacey Abrams for years, outing her left and right. And so I was there for 8.5 years and I would say, like, I'm an anarchist. Like, I can't talk your politics. I don't care about politics. I've completely given up. So, but it was like an opportunity. It was very thrilling, and I did it. And my kind of compromise, and I think I was right. I think my compromise was correct, which was, I'm an anarcho-capitalist, but I don't need to burn the whole thing down. I want to kick the can. I want to just just call people's attention to what's in the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, which people are like, those aren't all your rights. It's kind of misleading. Like, it's not. It's a restraint. It's express restraint on government. So they cannot, that was a deal we made when we fought the revolution, I guess. I mean, to take the official narrative for it. And they should have to answer for it. And I did for a while, a really long time. I was very successful communicating that. And even though I would recognize false flags, and after the Boston Marathon bombing, I mean, I just knew, and I would just dig into the news and I would just see MH370. I figured out where that was, everything. It's all out there and it's just covered up constantly. Mm-hmm. And I would just tell people, like, it doesn't matter if you think I'm right about that stuff. It doesn't matter. What I'm telling you is these things are happening so that they can convince you to give up your rights. If you have some backbone, you don't have to believe a word I say about how I interpret the events that are in those rags that land in your driveway every day. You just need to remember when they tell you that all this shit happened, and then they say, therefore, Fourth Amendment's got to go, the Fifth Amendment's got to go, the Second Amendment's got to go, the First Amendment's got to go, the Ninth and 10th are already gone. When they tell you that stuff, you need to not believe it. And then you know what happened? What? Donald Trump got elected. And they said, and this is a quote that totally encapsulates where it went from there. Monica, you're quibbling about semantics when you quote the Constitution. Because I was using it against Trump instead of Obama. And then I really, really lost heart. And then I realized that I came to another epiphany, which was that libertarian, my libertarian approach of kicking the can. I still defend the Bill of Rights. I will absolutely not. I do that thing with Garland. What could be more nitty gritty system, defending than helping that, or at least informing people about his fight in the courts. Mm-hmm. But I realized that trying to fight for liberty in a system that absolutely is there to exploit your rights and liberty rather than to protect them. It just cannot. But you could read Our Enemy the State by Albert J. Nock if you want a little, like, very simple, elegant analysis like that. But then I started realizing that, okay, do I deserve liberty? Do I deserve the Constitution? Do I deserve any of it? Fact is, those guys who are in control of all that stuff are animals, and they act like animals with their guns and their lies, and they're animals. So what do I need to do? Well, I don't have to act like an animal, but I should probably act like a fully formed human being, which is somebody who knows how to make food, use weapons, stuff like that. And I was inspired. I mean, I thought saying bad words was bad. I'm really going to say a bad word now. I liked Ted Kaczynski's book, Technological Slavery. It was really illuminating. And he said his ideas weren't original. Jacques Ellul, others have said the same thing. And that's why I was saying, like, I'm like a little off on civilization now. I read another book, Against the Grain, where basically civilization was just a way to get people to grow the kind of food that could be confiscated for taxes. That prior to that, we could do permaculture. They knew how to cultivate food, but you'd grow potatoes and you can leave potatoes on the ground for a couple of years. Nobody can force you to dig them up and steal them for taxes. But if you grow grain, it'll harvest at the same time, and they can come in there and steal it from you the second, because it's there, it's ready to go. You got to pick it. So I just started thinking that there was another way. Now, so I kind of don't call myself an anarcho-capitalist anymore. I really call myself an aspiring or philosophical agorist, because I try, of course, to engage in gray markets. Who doesn't? It's like a moral imperative, and, just to try to avoid any kind of surveillance or taxation or whatever. But the opportunities are very rare because they surveil everything. And the closer you live into the city, the harder it is to have a chicken. So I'm not walking the walk, but I'm a talker. I'm a thinker. I'm telling you what I've concluded. And if it's impossible for me to execute, then I am truly in a cage as a slave, or I'm too old, or whatever. But I'll tell you, my kids, they look around and they think, I should probably know how to grow something, just because, you talk. I don't know. I don't know if I'm doing any good, but I have come to that conclusion that it's so.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a huge problem with our society. Is that, I mean, if things stopped and halted as we know them, and we were forced to depend on yourself, you had to run for the hills and start, living like hunter gatherers. How many of us would be able to do that? How many of us would be able to survive something like that?
Because we're not prepared. Mm-mm. We would all be able to do it.
Yeah, we could if we knew how. But there's so many distractions out there. There's so many things that, and a lot of this stuff is definitely by design, for sure.
But the so the podcasting thing wasn't, so I did that, and then we just my producer on that show, kind of a co-host. Oh, he's a sidekick. Then now he's my co-host on Propaganda Report, and I think we really do a good job. So they never gave me the daily show on the terrestrial radio, but they taught me so well that I just decided the time was right for us to do it, just a daily show ourselves. And we're doing it. We're kind of learning as we go, inventing kind of how a format would work where you can pay the bills, because it's a full-time job for both of us, which is really a lot of hours for one podcast to have two people working 40 hours a week. I mean, it's a lot. And, but the patrons really are the ones who make it possible for us.
Well, and that just goes to show that you have people that are wanting this kind of content and information. People are starved for the truth,
Yeah, we try to mix it up so that we present the news of the day for people who are still interested in that. But a lot of people are just moving away from that. So we do a lot of other things, like we have interviews. And, we're going to do a live stream with our friend Adam the Agorist, Gorist, who you've probably seen on Union of the Unwanted once or twice. Mm-hmm. We're doing that February 20th on the Propaganda Report YouTube channel. I wanted to tell you, if you'll hear it, about the lowest point I was ever at, because I know.
Yeah, we never even got to that. Time. Yeah, I got. We can go to 50.
All right,
7 minutes.
7 minutes. I'll give you 6.
Okay.
So I worked, I went to school, kind of got a late start because I went to a lot of school and whatever. But so when I got married, my husband people were a little iffy on him because he doesn't say a lot. And my family were talkers, and he was from Texas and we're from New York. So maybe the jury was out a little bit. And I moved to Texas with him, and we were expecting our first child, and he came early, and to our surprise, he had Down syndrome. And it was the first child. Like, it was unbelievably devastating. Like, this was not something I could deal with at all. And so I've been through some hard knocks, not like you, but I certainly saw them. And growing up in a house like that, it was hard to whatever. So I always had that philosophy of, like, if you don't like it, if it's not working, fix it. Nobody's going to help you. Just go. So this happened. And when when the doctor told me this, and I just, it was just like falling backwards into an elevator shaft. It was like the worst. And I looked into myself, deep, I just looked, and every other time my whole life when I had that moment and I looked inside myself and I just found where you could grab onto those bootstraps and just, I'm going to get through this. It was nothing. It was just a black void. There was nothing there except for, what was I thinking? I remember thinking, I don't know. I felt bad. Bad. And I didn't want to look at my husband because I was afraid that he would be really disappointed that he married me, because they always blame the woman. And he absolutely did not. As a matter of fact, he loved that baby. He didn't care at all. It was the craziest thing. It was quite an inspiration for a guy who people were on the fence about. Yeah. And when I looked at him and I asked him, it took hours before I could say anything. But I looked at him and I asked him what he was thinking. And he said, well, I was at the baseball game a couple of weeks ago and I saw, so we were like close to having a baby. So he was excited about being a dad. And he said on the Jumbotron was a picture of a dad and his son had Down syndrome and they looked like they're having a good time. And he said, I thought that's the kind of dad I want to be. And now I have the chance. And it was like so inspirational. So
it's an awesome story.
Yeah. And like, it's not like this was whatever, Prince Charming situation. We had plenty of cultural problems, like culture clash when we got married, but that totally changed the trajectory of our marriage and our relationship. And he, like, I really saw the depth of his character immediately. And he just loved that baby when I could not deal with it at all. And then, but what is really the bigger moral of the story was that it felt like the worst thing that ever happened to me. And it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, this kid is awesome. He's unusually awesome. My husband says I say that just because he's my son. I'm like, no, he's unusually awesome. People love him. And my mother told me at the time, she was like, yeah, because they lie to you. You know, they're hard. These kids are hard. Don't get me wrong, but they're not sad. So she said, yeah, everybody, the doctors like make it sound really bad because they don't want you to have these babies. So so it was just another example of like, don't worship the medical establishment. Don't believe everything you hear. I mean, it is hard, and not living near my family was hard, but I mean, I can't imagine my life without this kid. And it's really been enriching, and it was a great experience for everybody. But it was just, you know, a lot of lessons were learned, and I feel like it was a worthwhile endeavor, even though it was very, very hard. And it looked like there was nowhere to go, period. Yeah. And it took a long time, but pretty, you know, two last things I will say. One is that for like 2 years, I could see I said to a friend of mine who also had a devastating birth problem and for her son. And I said, you know, I just see that little like dark place in my heart every time, you know, I just look there, and I wonder if that'll ever go away. And it went away the day I brought my daughter home from the hospital. So I was totally healed by this new little baby. I love them all, but it really was such a healing. So anytime someone has like a rough baby like that, whatever, I always say, no, another baby. Be like, it's too hard. Have another baby. And then, after that, I realized that any day that is not devastatingly tragic is awesome. You know, any day that something really bad doesn't happen is an awesome day that you should cherish, because the bad days will come, and you just want to, you know, have your cocktail if that's your thing, go for a walk, you know, walk your dog, pet your dog, hug your kids, but the bad days will come. So might as well really cherish the ones. And I used to have a little bit of depression. I never, ever, ever had another day of depression after that, you know, once I got out of it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm glad you did get out of it. And that was a great story. You know, I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and we had, me and my ex had ours late too. You know, she was late 30s, and it's both of the parents, the sperm as well as the it depends on both of them. Yeah, it has nothing, you know, the older that it is, the harder it will be, or the more the chances increase on both sides of it. So
yeah, I think that's true.
So yeah, thank you for coming out and hanging out with me and interacting with some of the listeners there. And why don't you go ahead and, well, we got one more, Stacy. So glad I caught your show today, Sean. Great convo.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome.
I hope I didn't just squeeze that in too much, but I just wanted to tell you, because that was just a kind of rock bottom story.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all have them. and the more that we talk about him, the more that other people can start resonating with them and getting through whatever it is that they may be going through, or thinking that they're the only ones, and I'm the only one that's going through this. Yeah,
it's a great thing also when you want to treat other people with compassion and patience, that you just do not know what that person's going through right then. And if it's a good day for you, give a little.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody where they can follow you?
Thank you. I tweet a fair amount at Monica Perez Show. You can I have a little community, like a little fake little Twitter on my URL, thepropreport.com, my website, which is really fun. And we're starting to do meetups. So go there. You can hear all of my shows. We have a continuous stream player there. We do tons of extra content. Every single day we do extra content. We do cocktail parties live. We do Zoom parties. So if you want to just check out all the different things we have on patreon.com/propaganda report. And Binkley brings this crazy stuff, clips of the conspirators conspiring. We do these exclusive videos for Rokfin, and he brings World Economic Forum stuff, Brookings Institution, information ops from the Army. It's amazing what's out there if you spend the time to do the research. And he just blows my mind every time. So rokfin.com/propaganda report. It's subscription, but a lot of those guys from Union of the Unwanted are there, and you get everybody's content for that subscription. It's kind of like a free thinkers Netflix. It's really fantastic. And that's it. That's all I do pretty much.
Well, that's awesome. And like I said, thank you for coming out and hanging out with me. I hope we stay in contact.
Sean, you should plug your stuff, because if you let me, I'll put this in my feed.
Oh, okay. You can find me on at linktr.ee. Hold on one second. We can just go ahead and do my little thing right there. All the ways to connect to the show, support the show monetarily, all the social media links, merchandise, Patreon, all that stuff. Although my Patreon isn't really anything right now, nothing like any of the other people that I follow. It'll get there at some point. That's the best way to follow this show. I do a live stream all the time. I mean, like I've got back-to-back tonight. It just depends on when my guests schedule the show, and I just do it then. And then tomorrow it'll come out on the podcast platforms. I'll turn around and flip it and put it out tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And hopefully we stay connected and, and do this some more, and hopefully for a longer period of time, because I'd love to do a 2-hour dive with you and just pick
I'll
your
do
brain.
Whatever you want. I never stop talking. So you just pretty much need to go cut, and then we'll pick it up the next time. Totally fine. That's how I got that job in the first place, in answer to your question, finally. Just
awesome.
Never stop talking.
Well, that works, because I always got questions.
Thanks a million, Sean. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. And let's go ahead and take us out here with the outro. All right, Monica, I'll catch you later. And stick around, everybody else. I got one more coming up with a former NFL player who is on a conspiracy charge, got arrested and convicted of wire fraud, and he wants to talk about what that was like and how he and what he's doing for redemption and to redeem himself. His name is... Oh, shit, I can't even remember. Oh, well. I'll find out in a second.
You've been listening to the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast. Sean is a single dad, a union blue-collar guy, and he spent time in federal and state prison for drug trafficking and fraud. When he was released from prison in 2006, all he had was the clothes on his back, a bag of mail, and some paperwork. Since then, he's turned his life around and shares the struggles and successes on this podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you were moved. To connect to the show, book a guest spot. For merch, Patreon, PayPal, and social media links, go to linktr.ee/nowhere to go but up. On Instagram at Nowhere to Go But Up Now. On Twitter at But Up Now. On the YouTube channel at Nowhere to Go But Up Podcast. See you next time.